The first time I killed a man, I was 23 years old, trapped in a dusty compound in Fallujah with 3 wounded Marines depending on me to get them out alive. The second time I took a life, I was 24, clearing a building in Ramadi, when a shadow moved too quickly in my peripheral vision. I've never forgotten either of their faces. Most people in Mill Creek don't know this about me. To them, I'm just Pastor Thomas Wilson, the quiet guy who took over the little stone church on Maple Street 5 years ago. The one who gives decent sermons, remembers everyone's kids' names, and keeps the community food pantry stocked even when donations run low. They don't see the nightmares that still wake me at 3 a.m., sheets soaked with sweat. They don't know about the prosthetic I've gotten so good at hiding that newcomers rarely notice my slight limp. And until recently, they never imagined I'd fight for this church with the same focus and determination that once kept me alive in combat. But then Victoria Hargrove and her Mill Creek Community Development Association decided my church would make an excellent supermarket. It's simply a matter of highest and best use, Pastor Wilson. Victoria's voice had the practiced patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child. Her immaculately manicured hands rested on the polished conference table in the town hall meeting room. The church building is over 100 years, old, constantly requiring repairs, and frankly, underutilized most of the week. Beside her, Barbara Simmons nodded vigorously, her tablet poised to record my capitulation. The third member of their triumvirate, Elizabeth Parker, maintained a carefully neutral expression, though her eyes held the cold calculation of a predator assessing prey. I kept my own expression measured. St. Matthew's serves 300 families, houses the town's only food pantry, hosts AA meetings, provides free child care for working parents, and offers sanctuary to anyone in need. I'd hardly call that underutilized. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Noble activities, certainly. But the proposed Market Square development would provide jobs, tax revenue, and convenient shopping. The economic impact would benefit the entire community, not just your congregation. And where would those 300 families worship? I asked. Where would the food pantry operate from? Where would those in recovery meet? The developer has generously offered to include a multi-purpose community room in the new building, Barbara interjected. All those activities could continue there. I stared at her incredulously. You're suggesting we replace a historic church with a room in the back of a supermarket? A state-of-the-art facility, Elizabeth corrected, speaking for the first time, with proper HVAC, accessibility features, and modern amenities your current building lacks. The church isn't for sale, I said flatly. This conversation is premature and, frankly, inappropriate. Victoria's smile vanished entirely. That's where you're mistaken, Pastor. The Community Development Association has been granted eminent domain authority by the Town Council for the Market Square project. We're not here to make an offer. We're here to discuss transition timing. The words hit me like a physical blow. Eminent domain? For a private supermarket? That's not legal. Actually, it is. Elizabeth slid a document across the table. The Supreme Court's Kelo decision established that economic development constitutes public use. The Council has determined this project meets that threshold. This is the first I'm hearing of any of this, I said, anger beginning to replace shock. When exactly did the Council grant this authority? Last month's closed executive session, Victoria replied smoothly. It's all quite properly documented. We've already secured the necessary permits and financing. Construction begins in 90 days. I stood abruptly, metal prosthetics scraping against the chair. This meeting is over. I'll be consulting our attorney. Victoria raised an eyebrow at my reaction but remained seated, perfectly composed. The decision has been made, Pastor Wilson. You can make this transition dignified or difficult, but you cannot stop it. I suggest dignified, for your congregation's sake. As I turned to leave, she added, Oh, and we'll need access to the building next week for preliminary assessments. Tuesday at 10 a.m. works for our team. Please ensure all areas are accessible. I paused at the door, my back to them. I was in Fallujah in 2004, I said quietly. We had a saying there. No better friend, no worse enemy. I suggest you remember that before you try to bulldoze my church. Barbara snorted softly. Is that a threat, Pastor? I turned to face them one last time. No, Ms. Simmons. It's a promise. St. Matthew's has stood for 118 years. It will stand for 118 more. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with our church council, 8 dedicated members who helped govern our congregation. I laid out the situation without sugarcoating it. They're claiming legal authority to seize our property, I concluded. And according to our attorney, they may actually have it. Martin Green, our senior deacon and local hardware store owner, shook his head in disbelief. How could the town council approve this without public discussion? Half the council members attend service here. Closed executive session, I explained, apparently classified as an economic development matter, which doesn't require public notice. But it's a church, Sarah Keller protested, voicing what everyone was thinking. You can't just tear down a church for a grocery store. Our church. Attorney Phil Davidson cleared his throat. Unfortunately, the religious use doesn't automatically protect the property from eminent domain. If they've followed proper procedures, and preliminary review suggests they have, we're facing an uphill battle legally. So what do we do? Asked Rosa Martinez, whose family had attended St. Matthew's for 4 generations. Just surrender? I straightened in my chair. Decision already made. Absolutely not. We fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. The council looked to me expectantly. This was the moment that would define my ministry, perhaps my life's purpose. 5 years of serving this congregation, of finding redemption and purpose after the violence of war, had led to this crossroads. First, legal challenges to delay and potentially overturn the eminent domain ruling. Second, political pressure on town council members who approved this. Third, public relations, making sure everyone in Mill Creek understands what's at stake. And fourth, I paused, meeting each person's eyes. Direct, nonviolent resistance if necessary. Phil looked concerned. Pastor, as your attorney, I should caution against anything that could be construed as interference with lawful proceedings. Noted, I acknowledged. But this isn't just about legalities. This is about right and wrong. That church has been a sanctuary for this community through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless personal crises. I won't be the pastor who surrenders it, without exhausting every option. By meeting's end, we had formed committees, assigned responsibilities, and developed initial strategies. As everyone filed out, Martin lingered behind. Thomas, he said quietly, using my first name as he rarely did, I need to ask, how far are you willing to go with this? I considered the question carefully. In the Marines, I learned that commitment isn't real until it's tested. I'm committed to this church and what it represents. However far that takes me. Martin nodded slowly. Some of the council worry that your military background might lead me to extreme measures. I finished for him. I've seen enough violence for a lifetime, Martin, but I've also learned that some things are worth an absolute stand. The CDA doesn't know who they're dealing with, he said with grim satisfaction. No, I agreed. They don't. Tuesday morning arrived bright and clear. At 9:45 a.m., Victoria's assessment team pulled up in front of St. Matthew's, 2 contractors in pressed khakis, followed by Victoria herself in a Mercedes SUV. They found the church doors locked and me seated on the front steps, Bible in hand. Good morning, I greeted them pleasantly. Beautiful day for a conversation about rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. Victoria's expression tightened with annoyance. Pastor Wilson, we had an appointment. I don't recall confirming that appointment, I replied. In fact, I believe I made my position quite clear at our last meeting. This is official community development business, she snapped. You cannot obstruct access. I'm not obstructing anything. I'm simply not unlocking my church for people who intend to destroy it. One of the contractors shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, we can reschedule if this isn't a good time. Victoria silenced him with a glare before turning back to me. This childish display only delays the inevitable. We'll return with the necessary authorization. I'll be here, I assured her, along with a few friends. As if on cue, several cars pulled up, disgorging members of my congregation. They quickly formed a line behind me on the steps. Rosa Martinez and her extended family, Martin with several employees from his hardware store, and at least 20 others. Victoria assessed the situation with cold calculation. Organizing a protest? How predictable. Not a protest, I corrected. A prayer vigil. We'll be holding them daily from now on. All are welcome, even those plotting to tear down God's house for profit. Her face flushed with anger. You're making a serious mistake, turning this into a public spectacle. No, Victoria. The mistake was thinking you could quietly erase 118 years of community history without resistance. I gestured to the gathering crowd, now including curious passers-by and a local reporter who'd gotten wind of the confrontation. Mill Creek deserves to know what's happening here. As Victoria retreated to her Mercedes, I caught a glimpse of something I hadn't expected: uncertainty. The carefully orchestrated land seizure was supposed to proceed smoothly, with minimal public attention until it was too late for effective opposition. That plan had just collapsed. The CDA's response was swift and multi-pronged. By evening, they'd issued a press release framing the Market Square development as vital economic progress being blocked by a small but vocal minority clinging to outdated structures. The following day, Barbara Simmons was on local radio discussing the jobs and tax revenue the project would create. More concerning was the legal notice delivered to the church, a formal demand for access, threatening significant fines for any further obstruction. Our attorney filed emergency motions in response, but warned me privately that we were on shaky legal ground. They've done their homework, Phil admitted grimly. The paperwork is meticulous, the procedures followed to the letter. Someone's been planning this for months. But why our property specifically, I wondered. There are vacant lots on Main Street that would work just as well for a supermarket. Follow the money, he suggested. Development projects this size always have financial currents beneath the surface. Taking his advice, I enlisted Sarah Keller, who worked at the county records office, to search for connections. What she uncovered confirmed my suspicions and gave us our first real advantage. Victoria Hargrove's husband owned a real estate investment company that had quietly purchased several properties surrounding the church over the past 2 years. If the Market Square development proceeded, those properties would skyrocket in value, generating millions in profit. Furthermore, the developer selected for the project, Summit Construction, had made substantial consulting payments to a company, registered to Elizabeth Parker's husband. The appearance of self-dealing was unmistakable. Armed with this information, we expanded our resistance strategy. The daily prayer vigils continued, growing larger and attracting media attention beyond our small town. We launched a social media campaign highlighting the church's historical significance and community services. Most effectively, we began circulating detailed information about the financial conflicts of interest driving the project. The CDA's response escalated accordingly. The church's tax-exempt status suddenly came under routine review. Building inspectors appeared, citing obscure code, violations that would cost thousands to address. Congregants who worked for the town reported subtle pressure to distance themselves from the controversy. The conflict reached a new level when Victoria managed to get a court order limiting our prayer vigils to no more than 10 people at a time, citing public safety concerns. The day the order took effect, I stood alone on the church steps, watching as police reluctantly established barricades. "I'm sorry about this, Pastor," Officer Reynolds said quietly as he strung yellow tape across the sidewalk. "This isn't what any of us signed up for." "Just doing your job, Mike," I assured him. "But know that we'll be doing ours too." That evening, I met with church leaders in Martin's hardware store back office. Neutral ground away from potential surveillance. The mood was somber but determined. "They're trying to break our momentum," I explained. "Isolate us, exhaust our resources, and wait for surrender." "Standard siege tactics," observed Jack Thompson, a retired Army sergeant and church usher. "Cut supply lines, demoralize the defenders, wait them out." "Well, they picked the wrong church to besiege," Rosa declared. "My grandfather helped lay those stones. My children were baptized there. I'm not backing down." "Neither am I," assured them. "But we need to be smarter about our resistance. They're expecting conventional opposition, legal challenges, public protests, moral appeals. We need to change the battlefield." Martin leaned forward. "What did you have in mind, Pastor?" "Information warfare," I replied. "Victoria and her allies have been operating in shadows. Let's drag everything into the light." The next phase of our campaign began not with a public demonstration, but with a meticulously researched dossier delivered to every member of the town council, local media outlets, and state regulatory agencies. The document detailed the financial conflicts, backroom deals, and procedural irregularities surrounding the Market Square project. Simultaneously, we filed formal ethics complaints against Victoria, Elizabeth, and Barbara for failing to disclose their personal financial interests in the development. We petitioned for a special town meeting under a rarely used provision in the town charter that allowed citizens to challenge council decisions made in closed sessions. The response was immediate and chaotic. Two council members, facing uncomfortable questions about their votes, publicly backpedaled and called for project review. The State Attorney General's office announced a preliminary inquiry into potential ethics violations. Local business owners, initially neutral about the development, began questioning whether proper economic impact studies had been conducted. Victoria's carefully constructed narrative was unraveling. Instead of a straightforward economic development project, Market Square now carried the stench of insider dealing and corruption. The breaking point came during a hastily called press conference where Victoria attempted to regain control of the situation. Flanked by Barbara and Elizabeth, she dismissed the allegations as desperate fabrications by those resistant to progress. A reporter from the county newspaper raised his hand. "Ms. Hargrove, can you explain why your husband's company purchased 5 properties adjacent to the proposed development site just months before the project was announced?" Victoria's composure slipped momentarily. "My husband's business activities are separate from my role with the CDA." "But you didn't recuse yourself from decisions directly affecting those properties' value," the reporter persisted. "These questions are inappropriate and designed to distract from the project's benefits," Barbara interjected sharply. Another reporter called out, "Is it true that Summit Construction paid over $200,000 in consulting fees to a company owned by Ms. Parker's husband?" Elizabeth's face drained of color. Before she could respond, Victoria abruptly ended the press conference, physically pushing past reporters as she rushed to her car. That evening, as I was locking up the church after a small prayer meeting, Victoria's Mercedes screeched to a halt in the parking lot. She emerged alone, face contorted with a fury I hadn't witnessed before. "You," she spat, stalking toward me. "This is your doing." I stood my ground. "The truth is, its own defense, Victoria." "Truth? You're spreading lies and innuendo to protect a crumbling building that should have been condemned years ago." She gestured wildly at the church. "Look at it. Outdated, inefficient, a drain on resources. We're offering progress, prosperity." "You're offering self-enrichment disguised as community development," I corrected. "And you're willing to destroy something precious to do it." Please, she scoffed. Spare me the sanctimonious sermon. This isn't about religion or history or community. It's about real estate and economic reality. That property is worth millions for commercial development, which explains your husband's strategic purchases, I noted. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Pastor. I've built this town into what it is today. The businesses, the developments, the growth, all me. One little church isn't going to stand in my way. You didn't build Mill Creek, I said quietly. You've just been selling it off piece by piece. Victoria stepped closer, invading my personal space. I've crushed opponents with far more resources and influence than a one-legged preacher with delusions of grandeur. Back off now, or I'll make sure there's nothing left of you or your precious church. Something in her voice, the raw contempt, the casual reference to my prosthetic, triggered a response I'd thought long buried. In an instant, I was back in Fallujah, facing an immediate threat. My body tensed, combat instincts flooding back. With disturbing clarity, with conscious effort, I stepped back, creating distance. That sounded remarkably like a threat, Victoria. Would you care to rephrase for the record? I nodded toward the church entrance, where Martin stood filming the entire encounter on his phone. Victoria's expression shifted from rage to calculated caution. You're recording this? How dare you? Just documenting our conversation, I replied evenly. For the church archives, of course. She retreated toward her car. This isn't over, Wilson. Not by a long shot. On that, I agreed. We are in perfect alignment. The video of Victoria's confrontation never went public. It didn't need to. The mere existence of the recording, which captured explicit threats and admissions of personal interest, proved sufficient leverage when presented to the town's attorney. Within days, the town council called a special public session to reconsider the eminent domain authorization. The meeting drew the largest attendance in Mill Creek's recent history, with citizens lining up 2 hours early to secure seats. Victoria and her CDA colleagues sat stone-faced as speaker after speaker condemned the Market Square project and defended St. Matthew's value to the community. When the council unanimously voted to rescind the eminent domain authorization, spontaneous applause erupted throughout the chamber. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like merely the end of the first battle in a longer war. My instincts proved correct. 2 weeks later, the building inspector returned with a comprehensive list of code violations that threatened to close the church entirely, unless addressed within 30 days. The estimated cost for all repairs, $287,000, far beyond our modest resources. It's another angle of attack, Phil confirmed after reviewing the inspection report. Some of these citations are legitimate, but many are aggressive interpretations of the code. They're trying to accomplish through regulation what they couldn't, through eminent domain. The church council gathered for an emergency session to address this new threat. The mood was somber as I outlined our financial reality. Our building fund has $43,000, I explained. Even with emergency fundraising, we can't possibly address all these issues in 30 days. So they win after all, Rosa said bitterly. Not with a bulldozer, but with a clipboard. Not necessarily, Martin interjected. I've been going through the inspection report line by line. Many of these issues could be addressed with donated materials and volunteer labor. We'd still need licensed professionals for the electrical and structural work, I pointed out. Martin smiled for the first time that evening. I've been making some calls. Turns out quite a few licensed contractors in this county attend churches, and they don't appreciate what's happening here. Even with volunteer help, we'd still be short on materials, Sarah noted. About that, Jack Thompson spoke up. I was talking with some of my old military buddies. Several of them work for construction suppliers now. They might be able to help with creative pricing. I looked around the room, seeing determination, replaced despair on each face. Are we really doing this? Rebuilding the church ourselves in 30 days? Unless you've got a better idea, Pastor, Martin replied. I thought of Victoria's smug certainty that we would fail, of the developers already planning to carve up our sanctuary for profit. No better ideas, I confirmed. Just one addition. While we're rebuilding, we should make some improvements I've been considering. What kind of improvements? Phil asked cautiously. The kind that ensure no one will ever threaten this church again. What followed was nothing short of miraculous. A modern-day barn raising that transformed both the church and the community around it. Word spread rapidly through religious networks across 3 counties. Volunteers arrived daily. Carpenters, electricians, plumbers, general laborers, many with no connection to St. Matthew's except solidarity against what they viewed as an unjust attack on religious freedom. Donations poured in from unexpected sources. A rival church across town emptied their building fund to support us. A local lumber supplier miscounted our order, delivering twice the materials we'd purchased. Military veterans groups from across the state sent both money and muscle to support a fellow veteran's cause. We addressed every violation methodically, with licensed professionals documenting each repair for subsequent inspection. But we didn't stop there. Following my guidance, we incorporated enhancements that would strengthen the church's position for the future. We installed solar panels on the south-facing roof, moving the building toward energy independence. We expanded the food pantry and community spaces, reinforcing the church's role as a critical social service provider. Most significantly, we thoroughly documented the building's historical features and applied for official historical landmark designation, a status that would provide substantial protection against future development threats. Victoria and the CDA didn't remain passive during these efforts. Citations for noise violations appeared daily. Permit applications mysteriously stalled. Volunteers reported being followed or photographed, but each obstacle only strengthened our resolve and attracted more support from the community. By day 28, we had addressed every violation and transformed St. Matthew's into a modernized, energy-efficient, historically protected community anchor, all without compromising its spiritual character or architectural heritage. The final inspection was scheduled for Monday morning. On Sunday, we held a special service of rededication. The sanctuary overflowed with supporters, church members, volunteers, community allies, all gathered to celebrate what we'd accomplished together. As I stood at the pulpit, looking out at the diverse gathering, I felt a deep sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since my military days. This was what I'd been seeking in my transition to civilian life. Not just personal redemption, but meaningful defense of something greater than myself. Today, I began, we celebrate not just the preservation of a building, but the reaffirmation of what this building represents: community, compassion, continuity across generations. St. Matthew's has always been more than stone and wood. It's a living testament to what we value most. From the back of the sanctuary, a voice interrupted. Very moving, Pastor, but perhaps premature. Victoria Hargrove stood in the entrance, flanked by Barbara and Elizabeth. She held up an official-looking document. The inspection has been rescheduled, she announced with poorly concealed satisfaction. Indefinitely, pending review of permit irregularities. A murmur of anger rippled through the congregation. I raised my hand for silence. Victoria, I greeted her calmly. I'm surprised to see you in church. Please, join us. Today's sermon is about David and Goliath. Save the biblical analogies, she snapped. Your time is up. The building department has concerns about whether all this work was properly permitted. Everything will need to be opened up and re-inspected from the foundation up. On whose authority? Martin demanded, rising from his pew. Victoria smiled thinly. On the authority of the Mill Creek Department of Building Safety, which, I should mention, falls under community development oversight. The sanctuary fell silent as the implications became clear. Victoria had found another bureaucratic weapon to wield against us, potentially requiring us to tear out completed repairs for inspection, then rebuild yet again. I should have felt defeated. Instead, I felt a strange calm, the same clarity that had occasionally visited me in combat when a situation crystallized to its essence. "Victoria," I said, stepping down from the pulpit to face her directly, "I've been patient. I've followed legal channels. I've respected the process, even when you've abused it. But this stops now." "You have no choice," she replied dismissively. "Building code enforcement isn't optional." "You're right about one thing. I don't have a choice." I turned to address the congregation. "Everyone, please take out your phones. Record what happens next." Confused but trusting, dozens of phones rose throughout the sanctuary. I turned back to Victoria. "For the record, I am formally requesting that you present any legitimate safety concerns in writing. We will address them promptly, as we have all previous citations." "This isn't a negotiation," she began, but I continued steadily. "I am also, for the record, notifying you that we have documented every instance of selective enforcement, procedural irregularity, and apparent self-dealing in this matter. This documentation has been provided to the State Attorney General, the County Prosecutor, and 3 separate news organizations, with instructions to publish if any further adverse actions are taken against this church." Victoria's confident expression wavered slightly. "But most importantly," I continued, "I want everyone here to understand something fundamental about this church." I gestured to the sanctuary around us. "St. Matthew's doesn't belong to me, or to any individual. It belongs to God and to this community. And this community has made its wishes abundantly clear." I looked directly into Victoria's eyes. "You can continue this vendetta if you choose, but understand that every step you take against this church will be met with increasingly public resistance. The quiet little land grab you envisioned has become a spotlight exposing everything you'd rather keep hidden." "Is that really a spotlight? You want to intensify?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered openly across Victoria's face. She glanced at the phones recording her, at the hostile faces of the congregation, at the media representatives who had begun covering our renovation efforts. "This is your final warning," she said, but the threat sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No, Victoria," I replied quietly. "It's yours. Walk away now. Find another project, another target. Because if you continue this fight, I promise you will not like how it ends." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Then Barbara tugged at Victoria's sleeve, whispering urgently in her ear. After a moment's hesitation, Victoria turned and walked out, her allies trailing behind her. The congregation remained silent until Martin let out a low whistle. "Remind me never to play poker with you, Pastor." Scattered laughter broke the tension. I returned to the pulpit, suddenly exhausted but deeply at peace. "Where were we?" I asked with a smile. "Ah, yes, David and Goliath." Victoria Hargrove resigned from the Community Development Association the following week, citing personal reasons. The Market Square project was officially canceled shortly thereafter, the developer citing changed market conditions. The final building inspection, conducted by a county official rather than town personnel, resulted in full approval of all our renovations. 2 months later, St. Matthew's received official designation as a historical landmark, protecting it from future development threats. Most satisfyingly, attendance at Sunday services doubled, then tripled, as the community rallied around the church that had fought for its survival. The expanded food pantry and community programs flourished with new volunteers and donations. 1 year after our confrontation began, I stood on the church steps following Sunday service, greeting congregants as they departed. A familiar Mercedes pulled into the parking lot, and Victoria emerged, alone, dressed simply, without her usual armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup. She approached hesitantly, stopping at the bottom of the steps. Pastor Wilson. Victoria, I acknowledged, surprised but keeping my expression neutral. This is unexpected. Yes, well, she glanced at the church behind me. I thought it was time. Time for what? To see what was worth fighting so hard for. She met my eyes directly. And perhaps to understand why I lost. I studied her, seeing not the formidable opponent of our conflict, but simply another person, carrying burdens I couldn't fully know. Would you like to come inside? The sanctuary is open to everyone. She hesitated, then nodded. I would, actually. As we walked through the doors together, I reflected on how battles end, not always with decisive victory or defeat, but sometimes with small human moments of reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a beginning. You know, I said as we entered the sanctuary, where shafts of colored light streamed through the stained glass windows, someone very wise once told me that some things are worth an absolute stand. Victoria absorbed this, looking around at the space she had fought so hard to destroy. I believe you've made your point, Pastor. Not my point, I corrected gently. Theirs. I gestured to the sanctuary around us, to the generations who had worshipped there, to the community that had risen to its defense. Some battles aren't about winners and losers. They're about remembering what's sacred, and having the courage to stand your ground when it matters most.